Hey guys, Trey here. Another forecast discussion for you today. First major severe weather event likely for the plains, the southern plains region this year. We've got a moderate risk that was just recently upgraded on the 13Z outlook for parts of the eastern and southeastern Texas panhandle, surrounded by an enhanced risk around that. Kind of bleeds into southwest Oklahoma, and then a slight risk all the way around that. 15 hatched for tornadoes just east of Amarillo, east and southeast of Amarillo, with a 10 hatched surrounding that, 2% going all the way into southwest Kansas down into the Del Rio area. There's also going to be a wind threat and a significant severe hail threat today, 30 hatched in that kind of same area of the eastern Texas panhandle. So let's get started here. Big day on tap, so let's really take a look at this and see if we can narrow down a target area here. Here's our visible satellite. You can see the same swirl that we saw yesterday on the satellite has now moved a little bit east. And now you can see the upper level flow is oriented much more meridionally or north-south than it was yesterday. Yesterday we were seeing flow that was very much out of the southwest or even west-southwest here, traversing the Rockies. But now this trough is starting to eject into the plains, becoming a little bit more negatively tilted, and as a result, we've got a little bit more meridional flow in the going to be in place over the target area. So we'll take a look at the actual upper air maps here in a second, but you can really see that this sort of more meridional flow, which might be an issue today as far as storm mode goes. We'll talk about that in a second. But this is the current radar. At about a few minutes ago, we can see storms already forming here in the Texas Panhandle. These likely are mostly elevated storms, but you can see that we're already getting the effects of that sort of trough traversing the Rockies, starting to eject into the plains, and we have enough forcing here this morning for storms to fire in eastern New Mexico and the northwestern and western Texas panhandles. These should move off to the northeast as the morning progresses, and the question today is going to be how much clearing can we get in the wake of these storms. If we can get clearing, then it looks like it's going to be a big day. But let's zoom on in here on the satellite real quick. We'll go to the localized sector. See what we can see here. So this is our satellite image. You can see where those storms are, this band of colder cloud tops here. This is the infrared image. Also, we have a lot of clearing here in the Texas Panhandle ahead of that. So, it's kind of unfortunate these storms are going on, because if they were not going on, likely we'd have a very wide open warm sector for destabilization today. But we're just going to have to see how these progress throughout the day. These are moving very much to the north-northeast almost. So we're just going to have to wait and see how this progresses. If we can get clearing by early afternoon, I think we'll be in very, very good shape to tap into instability. There's already some instability in place, I believe. So, and we'll take a look at some soundings in a second. So that's one of the questions I have about today, is how much destabilization we're going to get in the wake of these morning storms. But let's take a look at the surface map now. We can see very nice, good, healthy east-southeasterly flow into the Texas Panhandle. We can see maybe some semblance of a surface low developing here. And if we go to our mesoanalysis, we can see a very nicely developed surface low, sort of multi-centered here across eastern New Mexico. That is a result of the trough starting to eject, that flow going over the Rockies, height falls to the lee of the Rockies, and we get the surface low to develop here. So we didn't really have as defined of a surface low yesterday. A little bit, the trough hadn't quite ejected yet, but we did have some weak semblance of it. But definitely going to have a nice, well-defined surface low here in eastern New Mexico, southeast Colorado for today, to really keep that moisture transport and that low-level flow out of the southeast, which is going to help our photographs later on, and our moisture transport, of course, later today. But as far as where we can see any fronts, we notice easterly flow here across the northern Texas Panhandle, northern Oklahoma, with easterly and east-southeasterly flow to the south of that. So it does appear that the front is somewhere in this region right here. I would say right about just maybe on I-40 or just north of I-40 right now, with dew points in the 60s down here in the Texas South Plains. Those are going to be streaming up to the north, and we've got some very healthy moisture down here. Dew points in the even some 70s here down by Corpus Christi and Brownsville. So good quality moisture. It appears that's going to be streaming up. Very strong flow up the Caprock, which may help later today. This is just unseasonably a good moisture content, boundary layer moisture content for the middle of March. So you don't see this often, and with the dynamics in play, this could have the potential to be a very, very big day. Let's look at some soundings here. So let's take a look at Amarillo, and you can see Amarillo already a quite unstable atmosphere here, elevated instability, but very unstable atmosphere. It's very kind of cool and the temperature dew point spread at the surface is very low, indicating that Amarillo at 12Z was just north of the surface front. So maybe it's actually the front's actually a little bit south of I-40. It's kind of hard to tell in here. Yeah, it could definitely see it being a little bit south, but would expect it to retreat as a warm front later today, given strong winds to the south out of the southeast and weaker winds to the north of it, allowing that front to move northward a little bit and retreat as a warm front. You can see the photographs, though, already very lengthy photographs as that jet max, upper level jet max, starts to move into the plains. You can see at 500 millibars, 65 knots, about 250, just below 200 millibars. We got 100 knots. So that wind profile is strengthening. Photographs are lengthy right now. Would expect this early activity that we looked at on the radar to possess some severe threat, likely some chance for large hail, given the instability in place, steep lapse rates, and the wind shear already in place. It's only going to get better later today, though. We do see some semblance maybe of the EML still, although we did have some drier air aloft yesterday. That has moistened. Again, this is north of the front, so we have to take it with a grain of salt, but steep lapse rates aloft here. If we go down to the Midland, Odessa area, kind of the same as what we saw yesterday, but this is very, very steep lapse rates here, indicative of that EML. Pretty decent moisture quality here at the surface, 66 over 61, especially for March. Nothing to scoff at. 61 dew points getting up into the Texas Panhandle. Very, very unusual, but definitely good for severe weather. Again, long photographs, a little bit of looping already in the photographs. That's just going to increase later on today. And let's take a look at the source region sort of for this severe weather threat. This is Corpus Christi, 71 over 71. So the air that is going to be flowing into the region is going to be sourced from this area of Texas, and the moisture quality very, very good across that region. Brownsville, much of the same, deep moist layer, 70 over 69 there. You can see that EML aloft. And then Del Rio, same thing, 70 over 65 is not something you see in March very often. Very steep, potent EML in place. Today, though, we're definitely going to have enough forcing to overcome that capping aloft. And we can see that on our 500 millibar map. You can see the trough, that very potent closed low, starting to eject into the plains. It will only move inch east as the day progresses. That jet max will strengthen to this and move into the southern plains here. So this area of the Texas Panhandle will be smack in the exit region of this trough, which is what we like to see. It's the best area for rising motion. Let's take a look at 850 millibars. We can see the low-level jet is already sort of in place here, 30 to 35 knots already in the Texas Panhandle. That is only going to increase especially toward the late afternoon and early evening hours. So, um, but what you like to see is the 850 winds are out of the south or even southeast. So the low-level hodographs are going to be very, very backed today as surface winds strengthen, the low-level jet increases, and that jet max starts to impinge on this region. So it looks like pretty much all systems go here for um, storms. Now, strong storms at that. Now, if we take a look, let's take a look at some model data perhaps. This is the NAM, 12Z NAM starting to roll in now. So we'll take a look at that. There's our trough located pretty much over southeastern Utah, southwestern and north Utah, northwestern Arizona. You can see that moves east. And this is actually somewhat of an improvement. We see a little bit more of east or southwesterly flow here rather than more meridional flow. Some of the models yesterday and the couple of days prior were showing more meridional flow, more north-south flow, and usually that doesn't really aid in all that many severe weather setups. Usually we see southwesterly flow aloft, and that helps storms vent the precipitation away from the updraft region. But a little bit more meridional means storms are going to be going more to the north per se. But this is looking good. I don't see an issue with this being, say, too meridional or anything. Maybe after dark, and once that sort of Pacific front arrives, is when we might see storm mode start to get clustery. Let's take a look at the 850s here. We'll zoom in and see how the low-level jet progresses throughout the day. You can see it's already in place here, and as the surface low develops, yeah, wow, that is impressive. Last night's NAM run was not showing nearly as potent of a low-level jet, but this is, wow, that is impressive. That's what you want to see for a big time clockwise looping hodographs, low-level hodographs. Is a strong low-level jet out of the southeast with surface winds out of the east-southeast. That looks very potent. I mean, 45, 50 knots here into the eastern Texas Panhandle, western Oklahoma. And let's take a look at our surface. Yeah, very potent surface low. Winds out of the east-southeast, southeast. That is usually a recipe for big hodographs and a substantial tornado threat. So this is it. This is at 21Z. So there's your dry line. There's your front. It's lifted, according to the NAM, into the far northern Texas Panhandle, northern Oklahoma. So let's take a look along that front. Kind of pick a few soundings here. We'll go ahead of the dry line as well. We'll take one. So this is along that warm front, and my goodness, you can see how favorable these hodographs are for strong tornadoes potentially. Look at that curving. Look at that veering in the lowest levels, veering in the winds with height. That's about as good as it gets. I can't really say much else. Big time instability, little bit of a capping inversion left, whether or not that's the NAM being the NAM. Sometimes they're too aggressive with the capping inversions. Sorry about that. Sometimes they're a little too aggressive with the capping inversions, but you can see kind of that stout EML in place. This is farther south along the dry line, a little bit of capping. Again, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Storms may just form later once the forcing arrives, late afternoon. But we're going to get storms today, and they're going to have the potential for large hail, given the steep lapse rates aloft, potentially very large hail, and given these hodographs and the turning of the winds in the lowest levels, potentially strong tornadoes. This is in the Texas South Plains, not quite as favorable of a hodograph there, but it would be supportive of severe storms with large hail down there. If we move on to 0Z here, just very well defined, and you can see kind of that Pacific front, they're calling it, starting to move in and impinge on the warm sector. That is when I think the forcing is going to be very on the high side. Storms might start to congeal into a line then, but if we can get storms out ahead of that, given the forcing starting to move into the region by mid-afternoon, I would say that we could definitely get storms ahead of the dry line here. And look, that warm front continues to lift here at 0Z into the Oklahoma Panhandle, far northern Oklahoma, almost to the Kansas border. And yeah, we've a little bit convectively contaminated. There's convection ongoing by this point in the model. But we can see it's uncapped now, and the large looping photographs remain. I mean, look at that. This has no convective contamination. This was farther south here along the dry line, I believe. No, this might be along the warm front. But just look at that profile. Instability over 2,000 joules per kilogram with over 400 effective inflow layer SRH. That is a recipe for strong tornadoes. A little bit of some backing here in the mid-levels of the winds. Whether or not that's going to have an effect, I really don't think it's going to have too much of an effect. As far as storm mode goes, we can take a look. Remember how this dry line was oriented, kind of north-south here, this initiating boundary. Let's take a look at our shear vectors to see how they match up. This is at 0Z. And wow, the shear vectors yesterday was showing a little bit more parallel to the initiating boundary. This is scary, I'm going to say. This is pretty scary. We have shear vectors that are now a lot more perpendicular down here in the Texas sort of South Plains area, southern Panhandle. Yeah, that is more than enough to get discrete storms for a few hours. Yeah, last night I had storm mode concerns because these shear vectors were more parallel to the initiating boundary. That's not the case on this NAM run. And let's take a look at the HER to see if it matches up. This is the 12Z HER just coming in. Let's take a look at our surface dew point with our wind barbs. So we can see how it has the dry line oriented. This is a 21Z, a little bit more of a bulge in the dry line there, and it has the Pacific front coming through a little bit later. And honestly, a little bit patchy on the moisture side from the HER, surprisingly. Not quite sure why that is, but still, upper 50s dew points in the Texas Panhandle in March is definitely going to get it done. Actually, let's go to our bulk shear, 0 to 6 bulk shear, and we can see the vectors here. And here we go again, more perpendicular to the initiating boundary than not. Yeah, this is very concerning for the Texas Panhandle, I would say. Just as far as what the radar might look like, this is the HER's best guess, and you can see by about 20Z it starts to break out a broken line of supercells, and you can see they're semi-discrete, no storm mode issues by then, and just numerous supercells ahead of that sort of Pacific front, likely with a significant tornado threat given the parameter space, as well as a very large hail threat. Then you start to see the Pacific front, that dry line, start to surge east, and you get a lot of forcing along that. That's when things might congeal, but if we can get these storms ahead of the front, I see no reason why these would not be capable of producing significant, potentially strong tornadoes and very large hail. So definitely something to watch out for. This is not a setup to be taken lightly. Take a look at the WRFs coming in. We'll go to the 0Z since they're not quite in yet, just to kind of see what some of the other cams are showing. And it's got those storms early on, like we saw, and wow, 22Z. That's 4 p.m. Broken line of semi-discrete supercells. And then it kind of congeals into a line, but definitely this model showing a couple hour period of isolated supercells, and this is the NSSL WRF. Has those storms going on. This might actually be the best depiction of the storms ongoing in the Texas Panhandle. And there you go. Broken line of semi-discrete supercells in that environment would no doubt have a significant tornado threat. And then our SHREF runs just to see kind of our cheat code, significant tornado ingredients. Yeah, that's at 21Z, bullseye right there, Eastern Texas Panhandle, increasing right at 0Z as the low-level jet really ramps up there, Eastern Texas Panhandle, Western Oklahoma. So all systems appear to be go for this setup. One of the more kinematically impressive setups I've seen in a long time for this region. Honestly, the setup kind of reminds me of November 16th, 2015. After dark event, multiple strong tornadoes here in the northeast Texas Panhandle into southwestern Kansas, including the Pampa, Texas wedge tornado that hit the Halliburton power plant there in town. Setup kind of reminds me of that. It was a very potent 500 millibar pattern, very similar to our sort of closed low like that. And wind shear profiles look very similar to that day, I believe, as well. Very large hodographs, very long looping hodographs. So, yeah, this is definitely concerning. 15 hatch, I think, is warranted. We'll have to see again how those storms this morning play out and whether or not there's ample clouds behind those storms and in the wake of those. If so, then the severe threat might be tempered. But right now, I just don't know if that's going to be the case. Really, you don't have, this is a powder keg, and you don't really need much to have a significant severe weather event unfold. So we're just going to have to wait and see. If you're chasing today, be safe. These storms are going to be moving probably very quickly to the north and northeast. So in this area of the Panhandle, not great as far as roads go. So keep that in mind. Keep your distance from the storms. It's going to be a potentially rough day for those folks out there in the eastern Texas Panhandle, maybe into western Oklahoma near dark. So thanks for watching. That's all I've got for today. And stay weather aware if you live in these areas. And we will see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.